Rational perspective on Chelsea 3 Leeds 2. It is the morning after the night before, and Chelsea are once again within touching distance of a trip to that wonderful place we all really enjoy going, Wembley Stadium. Now, I always say that I'm never someone to overlook or completely dismiss the joy of winning a game because I think it's just a base level thing of being a supporter of any football club is it makes your day. I feel less, in a mood, grumpy, and especially when you're doing a podcast or a YouTube channel about a football club, it makes the job a lot easier. But I think the consensus of last night's performance is that despite a brilliant late goal from Conor Gallagher that gave Chelsea a very important win to keep ambitions of silverware alive this season, the performance itself was not in any way convincing or allayed fears that Pochettino is in a position now where he's just kind of going from game to game surviving. And I think that that's something that unfortunately is something that you just cannot get away from last night. Watching Chelsea, how tactically wild at times they looked, how the team in the second half, especially post a period before the interval where Chelsea seemed to be getting their act together, or at the very least created a brilliant second goal, and maybe it was there for the taking to kind of come out and show themselves to be a higher quality team than Leeds and put the game to bed. The fact that that second half played out in a way that was very similar, eerily similar to the extra time that played out on Sunday that garnered so much criticism is something that doesn't reflect well on the coach. And I think it's very hard to avoid that. And I think this is again a case where I feel like a Chelsea coach just hasn't helped themselves. And it's very difficult, I think, from a fan point of view to experience watching Chelsea and to see us look so aimless, to see us look so haphazard at times, to watch, again, a weakened opponent, this time not a weakened Liverpool, but a weakened Leeds, who are in the Championship, outplay us at times in the second half at Stamford Bridge. I don't know how as a fan you're supposed to kind of turn around and go, well, that's just okay. Like that's it's part of the process. Like there is still a level of performance and quality and conviction I expect. And again, there are mentality things that are part of that in terms of players' own responsibility to perform. But then at some point, when I see it over a period of time, I'm asking questions of the coach. What are the directions being sent? And if you don't have the ability as a coach to influence those players enough, then it doesn't really say a lot about your power inside the dressing room and to get those performances out of players, because psychologically the team looks very weak at the moment. And I know that may sound a little bit silly when we just have won a game that could have gone disastrously. I give credit that we did get over the line, but it does feel like last night was a case of individual quality rather than a collective spirit, a collective performance that we had against Aston Villa, that we felt a bit in that second half against Crystal Palace, that we felt against Man City, and even in periods of the 90 minutes against Liverpool on Sunday. This was one of Chelsea's, wildest displays for quite a while. And I always think that, when you have displays like that, and if you continue on that trend, you're going to get caught out eventually. I thought the starting 11 was just a little bit strange. Robert Sanchez coming back into the team wasn't the biggest shock I've ever seen. But, given earlier in the season when Petrovic was waiting for his first start, Sanchez kept his place in the cup competitions. I'm not quite sure why at the first sign where he could rotate, Sanchez gets that opportunity. And, Robert Sanchez, let's just clarify things right here, is not Chelsea's first choice goalkeeper. And I wouldn't, be unhappy if we sell him in the summer. Because aesthetically, yeah, sure, I understand why people like him, but his limitations, we spoke about Petrovic versus Sanchez about a week ago, I think it was, in a breakdown show. You can go and check it out or leave it in the cards. And my issue with Sanchez is, when it goes right, it can be really effective, especially when you're coming up against a team who press you very high. But the risk is too great. The limitations are too severe. When you compare that to a Petrovic who has come in as a very young goalkeeper and looked competent, looked assured. I know on the ball he isn't the greatest in the world, but very few times does he put Chelsea in a position of jeopardy. And very few times do I get the sense that him and his backline have very little understanding of each other. And I think that in itself is something that just cannot be avoided. And again, goes to the head coach. Like, you're playing with fire, and you got burnt in some ways last night. And I think that, again, it's going to be on Pochettino for that quarterfinal against Leicester. For me, I don't see the reason why Petrovic won't be starting that game. Any valid reason. And then if Chelsea get done by Leicester, and it's a tight, game against Leicester, and we end up losing because of a goalkeeping error, again, I'm less looking at the player, I'm more looking at the coach, because you know what you're playing with there. It was the same with, looking around the team of, say, Enzo and Caicedo continuing to play, hearing about a lack of, fitness or exhaustion within the players. They play, but then we rotate to, not have Conor Gallagher, one of our best players, to not have our two most important players this year, Conor Gallagher and Cole Palmer, starting a very important game. Makes little sense to me. I understood some rotation in defence in terms of bringing Alfie Gilchrist. I think, Gilchrist got better as the game went on, I have to say, when he wasn't even playing in his favourite position. And he was up against, Daniel James, who is a very exciting and raw forward who does have a lot of speed that can hurt you. Maybe lacks that conviction, but I thought Gilchrist done a lot better. It was nice to see Chalobah back in the starting 11. I thought Chalobah at times had a dominant game, but I can't just ignore, even though I like Chalobah, I can't ignore his involvement in the second goal for Leeds, where, it seems like he's kind of expecting that ball to go out. Again, I wonder if Petrovic is in goal, he's a goalkeeper that's coming out and claiming that situation. But still, I don't think Chalobah dealt with that situation particularly well. And the way we conceded the first goal was absolutely shambolic, And again, I don't just want to pin all the blame on Robert Sanchez. Disasi, who's been good in recent weeks, just waiting far too long to play the pass to Moises Caicedo. Or if you're worried about playing Caicedo into a position where he has multiple Leeds players around him and he could lose the ball inside his own box, let's just try and play direct, and it's not just a case of just hit the ball long at any opportunity, but it was just really bad decision making, and it was the worst start to a game where Chelsea needed to start very well after what happened on Sunday. But they responded well. Let's get to some of the positives. I thought Nicolas Jackson, Moises Caicedo, I thought had a really good game again last night. I think it will be overlooked once again, but Caicedo does a lot of work that I think would get more appreciation if some of his interceptions led to goals, but we're so bad at transition opportunities that he doesn't really get a lot of credit. But his pass into Nicolas Jackson was really good, and the finish for Nicolas Jackson, it's a very important goal in an important game for Chelsea. Jackson unfortunately couldn't elevate his performance after that, but the finish itself was vital for Chelsea to get back into the game and to stop any slump and to try and get things back on level terms. He did that. He showed responsibility. He stood up. Really happy for Nicolas Jackson. Another goal for him in his debut Chelsea season. And despite, again, our performance and kind of our structure was quite weird. At times it looked like we were going into a back three, but then that really left a lack of width on the left side. So Sterling was, again, it looked like for most of the game, because Gilchrist is not a natural left back, was kind of playing on his own there. And I don't think Sterling had a good game, but he wasn't really helped out by an overlapping left back to give him those opportunities to kind of isolate one of the fullbacks. I think it was Conor Roberts on the right side for Leeds last night. So that in itself was a problem, and again, looked lopsided, didn't look that favourable to Chelsea, where players were popping up, because you had Mudryk kind of playing as a 10. You sort of saw Madueke and Mudryk kind of rotating quite a bit. It did work, and I think we've got to give it praise for that. But as a team and as a collective, again, it looked like the spaces were quite wide, where Leeds were able to transition on us at times. I think a better quality team is probably punishing Chelsea in that situation. But the second goal was absolutely wonderful. I thought the build-up to it was brilliant. I mean, Noni Madueke had some, again, erratic moments last night, but his build-up in that goal was very important. Raheem Sterling, got to give him credit for his ability to, play the right pass, get on the right side, go to the other side, and then playing Mykhailo Mudryk, who scores a brilliant goal. I mean, it's a brilliant first-time finish, and Mudryk actually, for all my criticism, I thought had a much better game last night, and the fact that he scores a goal, unfortunately, it isn't considered the winning goal, but for him, it was a positive night, and I think there would be some justification for him starting potentially as a number 10 on the weekend against Brentford. But he, this is the thing with Mudryk, right? And I'll say this again, and this is kind of a blanket statement I've made before. I have no issue saying I'm wrong about a player if they play well and Chelsea win. I think Mudryk still has very erratic moments, but so do a lot of Chelsea players. And, if Pochettino can find a position where Mudryk is going to be a very consistent and effective player, then listen, happy days, right? But listen, it was a good night for Mudryk. I know some people are pointing out stats of actually how effective he is, per 90 minutes compared to some other players. I think it's a fair point, but he has had some very erratic displays too. It's just interesting to see how that situation is going to be managed and whether Mudryk does find himself in a number 10 role moving forward. But then what do you do with Conor Gallagher, who, of course, is an important player for Chelsea, as he showed later in the game. The second half performance was just, pretty disgraceful, really. The way we just didn't turn up in the second half, or at least for a large portion of the second half, the game looked completely aimless with Chelsea. We had many opportunities sparked by some Caicedo interceptions to transition on Leeds, we decided to sit deep. If you sit deep, but then you can't counter properly, then it just looks really, really foolish. And the nature of their equaliser, Mateo Joseph looks like a really exciting forward. He gets his first 2 senior goals, though, against Chelsea Football Club. It's things like that people look at and they scratch their heads and go, it feels a little bit ironic. But then also, it's kind of like we shouldn't be getting done like that and really being a platform for players like that, not even first choice Leeds players, to get themselves up and running. And it was just a passive way that equaliser was conceded that was just very hard to take. And I think for a long period in that second half, it was very hard to see how Chelsea were going to find themselves a winner. But then, as I think happened during the game, the quality that Chelsea have within themselves compared to Leeds reared their heads, and that's how Chelsea won the game. Enzo Fernandez plays a really good ball into the feet of Conor Gallagher. Conor turns, brilliantly gets out of his feet, and unlike on Sunday where he hits it at the goalkeeper, he lifts it above Meslier, and Chelsea win the game. Conor again proving how big of a player he has been for Chelsea. I know it doesn't completely overrule what happened on Sunday, but for him, it's a really good moment, and it shows again why he is a first-team player, and it gets Chelsea over the line. But it was a chaotic night. I can't sit here and honestly tell you that, it was a really sign of Chelsea putting it back on the critics. No, I think that's disingenuous. I also think it's disingenuous to sit here and tell you it was all crap, because I thought Nicolas Jackson's first goal was good. I thought Mykhailo Mudryk showed signs of promise, especially with a finish of that kind of conviction for a player who doesn't show a lot of conviction. And of course, Conor Gallagher really stepping up and showing a level of quality when his team needed it. But for Pochettino, I think questions are going to be asked. And, I think you struggle to build patience and trust when performances look like they're just surviving and we're just limping from game to game to game, because then I think fans find it very challenging to see, well, what is the long-term vision here? If we just start surviving game to game, there's nothing really to justify the long term. There's no belief that in the long term we're going to get better, because there's no platform there, right? There's no sense that, they're good things, but there is much of a reason to believe that those good things could be cultivated and better formed into a better structure under a different coach. And that's what Pochettino, I think, is really struggling with. Now, only a couple of weeks ago, I think we were having more complete performances where I think you could genuinely sit here and go, as we did, that's a more convincing performance. The team looked more unified. But in a sense, that's the big question on Pochettino's head at the moment. And I don't think he's going to get sacked, I have to say, before the Leicester game at least. If you believe that the FA Cup is seen as kind of the biggest thing for the rest of the season, then I think he will keep his role until that game. But in terms of his ability as a coach and his ability to get the best out of players, I think there are serious questions to be had about player profiling, about why that team looks so scared at times or so reserved, especially after intervals. That I think that has to go on the coach. That can't just always go on recruitment, as we criticize rightly, but it's a serious concern. But listen, we've won. We've got a decent draw, probably one of the best draws you could have got in the last day other than Coventry, and we have a chance to get back to Wembley. That's all we can say at the moment. We'll see what happens on Saturday. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours as ever.